About 5 minutes ago, Flight Director Paul Kanya took a final go-no-go poll from flight controllers around the room here in Mission Control Houston to make sure all systems were a go before the release of Dragon this morning. The go for undock was confirmed by Leslie Ringo, relayed to Shane Kimbrough, who's monitoring Dragon's departure today in the cupola module.
Station Houston and 2, the first set of hooks are open. Dragon is committed to undock.
Copy, thanks.
And the second set of hooks are now opening.
Station Houston and 2, all hooks open.
Copy.
Release has been confirmed at 9:45 a.m. Central Time.
Physical separation visually confirmed.
Copy.
We're about 2 minutes out from that next burn. This burn will take Dragon out of the keep out sphere, that first invisible line with a 200-meter radius, to get the cargo Dragon away from the International Space Station. And we're about 30 seconds out from the next burn.
Station Houston and 2, departure burn 1 complete.
After that, looks like it's right down the chute in the corridor.
Copy.
Leslie Ringo confirmed with Shane Kimbrough that the last burn was completed and it was nominal. You're currently looking at a live view of the International Space Station Flight Control Room. About 5 minutes ago, Flight Director Paul Kanya took a final go-no-go poll from flight controllers around the room here in Mission Control Houston to make sure all systems were a go before the release of Dragon this morning. The go for undock was confirmed by Leslie Ringo, relayed to Shane Kimbrough, who's monitoring Dragon's departure today in the cupola module.
Station Houston and 2, the first set of hooks are open. Dragon is committed to undock.
Copy. Thanks.
And the second set of hooks are now opening.
Station Houston and 2, all hooks open.
Copy.
Release has been confirmed at 9:45 a.m. Central Time.
Physical separation visually confirmed.
Copy.
We're about 2 minutes out from that next burn. This burn will take Dragon out of the keep out sphere, that first invisible line with a 200-meter radius, to get the cargo Dragon away from the International Space Station. And we're about 30 seconds out from the next burn.
Station Houston and 2, departure burn 1 complete.
After that, looks like it's right down the chute in the corridor.
Copy.
Leslie Ringo confirmed with Shane Kimbrough that the last burn was completed and it was nominal.
Years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we will discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
Efforts in that pool have helped us and made us able to have this program.
Every step of a spacewalk, every step of EVA is so critical, and even though we see it every day, that one little safety tether could be life or death.
For every hour that they spend in orbit, they'll spend 5 to 6 hours training for that same task. So we've built up from the suit engineers and suit technicians who help them get into the suit. Now we've got trainers who help them learn how to use the suit and learn how to understand the suit. And then we've got divers who support them while they're in the pool. The closer they get to actually flying in the suit, the team of people who help them tends to grow. Maybe not exponentially, but it's certainly getting bigger.
A 12-person crew has kept a week-long vigil, while the barge, carrying the ET, made the 900-mile trek from Louisiana to Florida's central east coast. The iconic orange external tank finally arrives at the Kennedy Space Center. 1 month later, the ET is mated to the solid rocket boosters to form the backbone of the stack. Now, all that's missing is the spacecraft itself. When an orbiter returns from a mission, processing for the next flight begins almost immediately. It's a task requiring no less than 650,000 hours of labor. This includes the removal of its 3 liquid fuel engines and their replacement by 3 from a previous mission. They've been refurbished, inspected, and tested at the Stennis Space Center. With most of its flight preparations complete, Endeavour is towed in what is called the rollover, a short roll over a quarter-mile distance on a 36-wheeled vehicle from the Orbiter Processing Facility, the OPF, to the VAB. Here it undergoes its flight configuration. The rollout. Looking now much like it will at liftoff, the space shuttle is carried to the launch pad atop the 6 million-pound crawler transporter at a blazing pace of less than a mile an hour. Not exactly warp speed.
At our peak carrying full load, we get right around 38 feet per gallon.
Not too bad for an original 1965 hybrid vehicle with low miles. The 3.4-mile journey takes up to 6 hours. Just enough time to appreciate the route's picturesque surroundings. Kennedy Space Center is situated on a national wildlife refuge. Bald eagles, osprey, and vultures are just a few of the scores of bird species regularly spotted in local skies. Both land and sea are home to a wide variety of creatures, including manatees, dolphins, and of course, the ever-present alligator. Visitors are always urged to watch their step. Now on the launch pad, the orbiter is ready to take on its main payload. Testing assures that the multi-ton cargo is secured and safely stowed in the payload bay before the technicians certify the orbiter is ready for launch. Flying T-38 aircraft from Ellington Field in Houston, the crew members arrive at Kennedy's shuttle landing facility.
But finally the day comes when you're there and you're getting ready to launch. And you go into launch countdown and it's like going up the hill on that roller coaster. It's full of expectation and you're both thrilled and terrified at the same time because anything could go wrong, but when it goes right, it's a thing of beauty.
If there are no issues or concerns, technicians begin fueling the external tank with volatile liquid hydrogen and oxygen.
The predominant emotion is pride. There's a tremendous sense of pride in all that not only that you do, but that your teammates do, that people in this very firing room do, and folks all across the country.
The
This is Shuttle Launch Control, T-minus 9 minutes.
At the T-minus 9-minute hold, the launch director leads one final poll.
We finally come out of the hold at T-minus 9 minutes. I sit back and I watch my data, but I know that there are souls on board that ship whose lives are depending on the launch team to make the right decisions. I don't think about that consciously. The decision-making authority and responsibility, I know it's there, but I do think consciously about the crews and the people we're about to put on top of a controlled explosion and get to orbit.
This is the NTD conducting the launch status check. All stations verify ready to resume count and go for launch. OTC, OTC go. TVC, TVC go. PTC, PTC's go. LPS, LPS is go. Houston flight. Houston flight is go.
After nearly 3 years, hundreds of thousands of hours logged by engineers, technicians, scientists, seamstresses, electricians, and other program workers across the globe.
We have main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition.
The shuttle makes its way skyward. At liftoff, 6.6 million pounds of thrust begin hurtling the vehicle and crew at speeds that'll reach 17,500 miles per hour. The shuttle is like no other machine ever built. For its launch to succeed, more than 1 million parts must move together perfectly. How this engineering marvel came to be is an amazing story that begins in the early 1970s. The Vietnam War is divisive and costly. The economy is sliding into recession. And with the race to the moon already won, the Apollo program is canceled. A new mission is sought for NASA to send humans into space. But Mars, for many the next logical step on the path of exploration, is dismissed as too costly, a destination for a country preoccupied with events back on Earth. Instead, on January 5th, 1972, another destination is selected, low Earth orbit. As early as the mid-1960s, NASA had concluded that the technology was available to build and fly a reusable spacecraft.
President Nixon really liked the idea and told the NASA administrator, go do it. And the NASA administrator got a call from OMB the next morning, someone there, and said, hey, what the president really meant to say was, you're going to get this much money, and so do as best you can with the space transportation system. And our choice, logically, was you have to have a vehicle first, and so that was the birth of the space shuttle as the first in the 3-part space transportation system.
Many designs were considered. Often, they combined the best features of different concepts.
At that time, they were looking at having jet engines on the shuttle for landing and for transporting it across the country.
The idea of the lifting bodies was to bring astronauts home to a conventional runway landing. Previously, all of our spacecraft, which were capsules, came down in the ocean. Someone came up with the idea of a vehicle that could land like an airplane.
The key thing was to understand aerodynamic stability across the hypersonic, supersonic, subsonic, and landing speed type of environments that a single vehicle has to fly safely. That was the key thing that was learned from those, and you'll see it reflected in the shape of the space shuttle.
One was the use of a lifting body, an aircraft with no conventional wings. Only its fuselage would keep the aircraft airborne and guide it safely back to Earth.
They were known as the flying bathtubs. For the first test, the M2F1 was towed behind a car, a souped-up Pontiac. Whitey Whitesides drove that Pontiac across the lake bed at about 120 miles per hour, dragging this flying bathtub behind it.
As well as groundbreaking, their tests could also prove ground shaking. The X-24B, a lifting body with wings, was the first such craft to land on an actual runway as all shuttles would eventually do.
Early on, the space shuttle was going to have jet engines to return for horizontal landing, much like an airliner. The X-15 had proven fairly specifically that they can make horizontal landings very accurately, unpowered, flying a steep glide slope, that they could do a horizontal, unpowered landing with the shuttle.
As they tried to narrow its size, shape, and weight, engineers also considered how this new orbiter would be propelled safely out of the reach of Earth's gravity. At the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, home of the rockets that had sent every Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronaut into space,
all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
design teams would devise the partially reusable propulsion system that would finally be adopted.
The main engines were always something we paid very close attention to. Lots of moving parts, lots of high energy in very tight places, and very cold liquid on one side of a very small wall and very hot on the other side. When that thing finally lit off, for me, it just showed the power of a space shuttle main engine, and then there's 3 on the back of an orbiter, and then there's the 2 solid rocket motors. That was probably the spark that got me so interested in the space shuttle program in general, and what it took to actually get 1 engine to light, much less 3 and 2 boosters to take the shuttle to orbit.
As for the orbiter, spiraling costs forced NASA to abandon equipping it with its own jet engines and escape pod.
Originally, it was going to be an air-breathing airplane that would fly to space as a rocket and then come back to Earth. The orbital maneuvering system pods that sit on the back now were to be where deployable air-breathing engines would come out, and it would be able to fly from its intended point of landing to another place if the weather were bad or something like that.
NASA's new shuttle would essentially glide its way back to Earth. Producing the components of this new space transportation system fell to familiar names in the space industry. Prime contractor Rockwell North American, now Boeing, had built the Apollo Command Service Module. Morton Thiokol, now ATK, would build the solid rocket boosters, and Martin Marietta, now Lockheed Martin, would construct the ET. Responsibility for producing the space shuttle's main engines went to Rocketdyne, now Pratt Whitney.
There's a lot of teamwork that was going on. It was bringing people from all across the country, from Kennedy, from Johnson, from Marshall. So many people involved that had to work together. Now, at the beginning, there was a lot of anxiety that we weren't going to work together. But when people got to know each other and could trust each other, that's when the work began.
It was an amazing vehicle, and in a lot of ways way ahead of its time. To have a reusable spacecraft that could carry such tremendous amounts of cargo to space was unprecedented.
September 1976, more than 4.5 years after President Nixon signed off on its development, America's new spacecraft, Constitution, gets his first close-up before the cameras. The orbiter itself was well received by the public, but impassioned fans of a particular long-canceled television series called Star Trek wanted it called something else. They staged a successful write-in campaign, and the orbiter was renamed for the Starship featured on the show. Thus, NASA's new shuttle would be the Enterprise, boldly going as no spacecraft had ever gone before. Whatever its name, this bird still needed to prove it could fly. In an age before computer simulations, balsa wood models and wind tunnel testing was the only means to test the airliner-sized glider.
We put together a very aggressive flight test profile that consisted of data points continuously all the way down. There was not a matter of 10 seconds went by without another, either a pitch doublet or a rudder kick or an angle of attack sweep. The things that really turn on a test pilot to fly them as accurately as possible.
August 12, 1977. On a crystal clear California morning, high above the Mojave Desert, 2 NASA test pilots ready for Enterprise's first flight. The plan was for Fred Hayes, Jr., and Gordon Fullerton to lift the orbiter off a modified 747. However, Columbia quickly becomes a daunting challenge for NASA. Its complex makeup had engineers struggling constantly to reduce Columbia's weight and simplify construction. Especially frustrating was keeping the orbiter's ceramic tiles attached to its fuselage. More than 25,000 of them fit together to protect Columbia from the searing 3,000-degree heat of re-entry.
We were having a lot of problems with the thermal protection system of the tiles. The way we were trying to glue them on, they wouldn't stay on. And we had to come up with a way of making sure that they'd stay on. And we had some really great people that worked that, and that's why it took such a long time. I had hoped it was not going to take that long since John and I were named as a crew, so we had a lot more time to train than what we had both initially planned.
The requirement was to be able to handle temperatures like 2,500 degrees F that occur on the surface of the TPS, and that's 5 times what your oven is at home that you bake cookies under at max. The other problem is weight, because after all, this is an airplane, so you can't have a metallic system on it that weighs tons. It has to be extremely lightweight. And in fact, the shuttle tiles are about 90% air, and that gives the combination of being able to be temperature resistant and yet at the same time light.
Each orbiter has a unique number of protective tiles. Challenger was built with the most, 31,088, while Atlantis has the fewest, a mere 24,177.
Over in Palmdale, they had put on their first effort of putting the tiles on to protect the aluminum from the heating they were going to get on reentry. And some of those tiles, when they put them on in the daytime, next morning the tiles were on the hangar floor. And so that was real scary that we could lose some tiles while they were on orbit and really have a problem with the heat coming back on reentry.
Columbia had a lot of tiles missing yet, needed quite a bit of work before we could deliver it to the Cape. And we scrounged throughout the city of Lancaster for RTV, which was the material we used to glue the tiles on with.
More glue did keep the tiles in place. However, water was literally ripping them apart.
It turns out, in the instant we hit rain, the tiles almost exploded.
The tiles fabrication process was modified and the problem overcome. Other shuttle design features proved less problematic and more groundbreaking. A computerized digital flight control system, now common in commercial and military aircraft, was developed for the orbiter.
In flying the space shuttle, you were so aware that you weren't necessarily talking to the shuttle, you were talking to a computer who in turn was going to talk to the shuttle.
Barriers of race and gender were falling everywhere, and America's corps of shuttle astronauts would become more reflective of the nation it served.
There's been a lot that the shuttle era has done to bring space flight into the domain of the average person. We know it's not just crew-cut white test pilots anymore. It's essentially the United Nations that flies on the space shuttles. It's people of every description that look very much like the rest of us.
The astronaut selection process reflected a changing nation and a changing NASA.
At the time, all the astronauts were military test pilots and there were no females, so it was kind of like one of those dreams that you hope will happen someday, but you didn't really think would.
The NASA astronaut class of 1978, the largest in the agency's history, came from all walks of American life: physicists, meteorologists, fighter pilots, scientists, and for the first time, women and African Americans.
When I came into the astronaut program in '78, there were 3 African Americans that came in.
I believe.
Anyone who was a Sam, and so those emotions were, finally released, and you said, "Wow, the flight was done safely. They're back home. The shuttle really does work. It's a great program. It's got a great future ahead of it."
Hey, this thing works, and got it back all in one piece, which is what we wanted to do.
While Columbia's return was spectacular, it would renew NASA engineers' worries about the shuttle's thermal protection system. During the post-landing
Hey, this thing works, and we got it back all in one piece, which is what we wanted to do.
While Columbia's return was spectacular, it would renew NASA engineers' worries about the shuttle's thermal protection system. During the post-landing inspection, 148 of the orbiter's tiles were found shattered